I'm Rachel Horgan. Join me each episode as I sit down with a guest co-host covering the latest business stories in the Seattle area. We'll read the news so you don't have to. This is The Weekly. Okay, I'm back, everybody. I was in Boston for another client. They hired me to help with their user conference for 2,500 people. No pre-planning, just on-site working it. And I know I'd mentioned I was trying to get an episode together, but my contacts, it didn't quite work. And I was going to do it with my friend, but we hadn't seen each other in a long time. So it just didn't work. And I was reflecting on a conversation I had with somebody who has been doing podcasting for years. And he was saying, like, let yourself have a week off. Like, don't put so much pressure on yourself. So I'm trying to give myself a little grace on that. But also, you know, absence makes the heart grow fonder. So I wanted to make you guys miss me. The other thing I learned about Boston is it's illegal to have happy hour. When I tell you, you're shocked, right? When I tell my jaw was on the floor and I thought the bartender was joking, it's illegal and it's something to do. I don't know. They if they discount anything that has to be like for a month, that's like the loophole. You can't have like from $4 to $6. And I'm like, what do you text your friends? Like, do you guys want to get together for full price drinks? Like, you're not saying you want to get happy hour? Like, what is that? So if you want to run for mayor of Boston, that should be your platform. All right. So the last thing I'll say before I introduce my guest is that I'm moderating a panel on the cost of living. So if you want to see me in person live, I'll be moderating this panel on June 4th. And that's through the Seattle City Club. They reached out and asked if I could have this conversation. And that'll be hosted at the Collective in South Lake Union. I will try not to make that a complaint fest about how expensive it is to live here, but hopefully it'll be a good one, a good productive conversation. And now I'm at the zoo. I'm so excited. I'm sitting here with Alejandro Grajal, president of the Woodland Park Zoo. Hello.
Hi. Thank you. Great to be here.
It's so fun to be here. So I have to admit, I know I mentioned this earlier. I've actually never been to the zoo, and I'm so embarrassed by this.
So you're probably one of the minority because
I am.
We do visitor surveys and market surveys. 97% of people in Seattle have been to the zoo in the last 3 years.
Well,
so
now I feel left out.
one of the minority. Yes, yes.
I have been to Zoo Tunes, so I've got like half a point.
Yeah.
But your team was so gracious; they just gave me some free tickets, so I definitely will be back, Alejandro. A little bit about you: you're the 8th leader of the zoo in over 100-year history, assuming the role in 2016. Before joining the zoo, you served as the senior vice president for conservation, education, and training at the Chicago Zoological Society and Brookfield Zoo. Prior to that, you were the executive director of international programs for the National Audubon Society, and you're an author. And let me tell you, I think this whole episode could have been your history because it just kept going. You're like any committee you could ever imagine that's part of the zoo, you've been a part of or led. So that's just a snippet of it. Clearly, you're passionate about the zoo and animals. Tell me why that started. Like, when did that start and why?
Well, a long history, but in a sense, even from when I was a kid, I loved animals, even though I'm always lived in big cities and my family was not very outdoorsy friendly. My mother had plastic plants, for example, but somehow I got the treat for this. And I'm a biologist myself. So I've been a marine biologist. I worked in coral reefs and then ended up working with birds. And then in international development around the world, as consultant, as advisor to World Bank and other agencies. And then, but realized that humans are the solution as much as the problem for conservation. Mm-hmm. So ended up, where is the place where millions and millions of humans come to be in contact with animals? And these are zoos. Mm-hmm. So the reason for me to work in zoos is that this is where the super rich interaction happens between people and animals. And zoos are beloved institutions. So in a sense, changed my kind of career from international development and field conservation to being a zoo professional and a zoo executive. And that's what I've been doing for the last 25 years, really. Changing the transformation that's happening to zoos. Zoos changing from being a menagerie and a presentation of animals to really zoos as being as agents of social change. Mm-hmm. How do we instill a conservation ethic in people? And how do we talk about animals in a direct and emotional way that you can connect with nature? And there's no better place to do that. And I've done a lot of social research in addition to being a a biologist. I've been doing a lot of psychology research on behavior change and market research. And the reality is that zoos are incredibly powerful platform to really change people, emotions and intentions about the environment. So that's what I'm doing. Not only changing it here in Seattle, but also worldwide, really driving the industry to a new vision of what the modern zoo should be doing.
Yeah, I watched a documentary in preparation. It was an older one. I think it's called Zoo Revolution, I want to say. And it just reminded me of how much zoos have evolved from these teeny tiny cages where people walked around and saw one animal in each cage. And now it's much more, to your point, about education and conservation. And, you know, I saw something about some insect was extinct in a zoo, or thought that it was extinct, and they found one more in a zoo, like repopulated the whole thing. So yeah, I definitely agree. And we're going to get into a lot of that with some of our stories, especially the first one. But really quick, before we get in, so I Googled and it said there's over 400 zoos and over 200 accredited zoos. And somehow out of all those zoos, you own zoo.org. You own the website zoo.org.
So yeah, that's a funny story. I wasn't part of that. I arrived much later, but in the 1990s, where internet domains were up for grabs, somebody thought here, and I don't think it was a kind of super thought out discussion, but you know, we need to have a website. When people decided that they needed to have a website, that is probably early 1990s. And they said, well, how about zoo.org? And it wasn't taken, so we took it. And now, you know, whatever, 20 years later, 30 years later, we are the zoo.org. I think that domain is really interesting. People not believe when you say, what's your email? At zoo.org. It's like, okay.
It's crazy because you're not, I was trying to think about, like, in context, I've been to the San Diego Zoo. And so I was trying to figure out the differences, sizes. And I think I wrote down that your revenue is what, somewhere around 69, 70 million?
Yes.
And theirs, I want to say, is what, 100 and...
Actually, San Diego is probably more close to 300.
I was going to say, I think it's 400 million, close to 400. I think you're right, in the 300 millions.
Yes.
So vast difference in different sizes of all the zoos. So it's amazing that you guys got that URL. I love that.
Yeah, and interesting. You can measure. People ask me, so how important or how big or how influential is Woodland Park Zoo? Because the funny part is that most people here in Seattle think is that it's a neighborhood zoo. It's a nice zoo. Well, I keep, you know, I'm on the global council of the Zoo and Aquarium Association. I'm on the global council that sees 2,000 zoos around the world. And I can tell you that Woodland Park Zoo is a unique gem that the people of Seattle don't know how lucky they are to have a zoo like this one in their neighborhood. It's probably not the biggest budget, not the biggest attendance, not the biggest area. You know, there are many other zoos with different attributions. But Woodland Park Zoo has, just like the city of Seattle, has been an incubator of innovation for decades. You know, from the 1980s to immersive exhibits and this idea of taking the cement and the bars away and moving into immersive ecological ecosystem-looking exhibits, to the idea of the 1990s influencing and investing in field conservation around the world, to now this idea of emotional connections and empathy to animals and driving not only what we do, but in all these instances, we've been doing extensive reach out and education and influencing the industry as a whole. So it's always been a zoo that has been punching above its weight in a sense. And Woodland Park Zoo is always looked in the industry as a paradigm of innovation.
That's great to hear. And I think you have the right perspective to be able to say that, or been on that committee that you're on. And it kind of speaks to, like, what's the definition of success, or like biggest or best? And like you said, it's not just the revenue, it's what else you guys are doing. So very cool. All right, so we've got 4 articles today. The first one is going to be about the Woodland Park Zoo. This came out just a little bit ago, a couple months, about their new exhibit opening up because of their $110 million campaign. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Then we'll talk about international tourism in Seattle. It's seeming to be down, and we'll see about kind of how that impacts the zoo. Third, we'll talk about Microsoft laying off 3% of its workforce. And lastly, we'll talk about Nordstrom officially becoming a private company. All right, Alejandro, are you ready to talk about?
Yeah. Those are very interesting news.
Yeah, I think so too. All right, the first one, there's not much of a recap because it is all about you, but basically the the headline is that the zoo ran a campaign and it's going to support a lot of initiatives, but mostly it's the Forest Trailhead exhibit opening in 2026. So I'm sure there were a lot of exhibits you could choose from. There's probably a lot of people asking you for different types of exhibits. Why did you ultimately choose the Forest Trailhead, and tell us a little bit about what it is?
Well, so it's an exhibit, and the reason we're calling it the Forest Trailhead, we believe that forests are a critical part for the conservation of wildlife around the planet. But in addition to that, they have about 80% of the diversity of creatures in the planet, including tree, plants, fungi, orchids, monkeys, whatever it is that you look at. And of course, they're huge storages of carbon. If you really think about the intersection of biodiversity crisis and climate crisis, forests are the solution. One of the surprising things that coming to Seattle is that most people don't realize that we live in the largest temperate rainforest in the world.
Really?
Yes. So there's the Cascadia rainforest that stands from Northern California to Southern Alaska, is the largest, most diverse temperate rainforest in the world. And we live in the middle of the rainforest. That's why people complain about the rain.
That's true.
It's not a tropical rainforest like the Amazon, but it's the largest temperate rainforest. Wow. And to me, it's a kind of a interesting ecological literacy question that most people don't realize that in a sense, would be like, I don't know, like Phoenix or Atlanta or some other metropolitan area. We live in a very interesting ecosystem that's connected to the Puget Sound and the dynamics between the sea and the land and the rain shadows that we create and the creatures that live here are really fascinating. So we need to tell a story about forest and forest around the world and how charismatic creatures of all these forests really connect people to the solutions about biodiversity and climate. So this exhibit is going to be perhaps our first thematic exhibit. It's not about a geographic region or a specific taxonomic unit, an animal, whether it's reptiles or birds or something. The theme of this exhibit is about forests and climate and what you can do about them.
And who's in charge of deciding which exhibit? Is it a meeting of the board, or how did you come across
it? So yes, in this case, it was a refinement of this idea. So if we started with a strategic plan. If the zoo wants to be a key player in changing people's perceptions and behaviors about climate change and biodiversity conservation, what kinds of exhibit can we design for that? And that's an interesting question for an architect, because it's much easier to say, I want an office building, or I want a reptile building, or I want a monkey building. But in this case, we asked for a conceptual design.
Make people think about climate change. That's hard.
So we have to say we were extremely happy working with a local firm, LMN, who's designed the convention center and the aquarium. So a fantastic resource to have in town, global capacity.
Very cool.
And they came out, the challenging task was, okay, we have a concept, how you make it into bricks and mortar, which, by the way, there are no bricks and mortar in the building.
Sure.
But that was an interesting ideological kind of challenge to create that. And they came out with this beautiful design. I think it's going to be a showstopper. For many cases, this is also going to be the largest indoor space that the zoo has had. It's the first ever exhibit that's going to be lifted from the ground, because all the other exhibits are at ground level. We're going to have a canopy walk that you're going to be walking around trees.
Cool.
We're going to have tree kangaroos that most people have no idea what tree kangaroos are.
I wanted to nod my head like I knew, but I don't.
Red pandas, the most intelligent parrot in the world, Kias from New Zealand. We're going to have dragons, lizards,
all the things,
rainbow fishes. It's going to be a story about the incredible richness of forests and what you can do about these forests.
So excited to check it out. And you said May 2026?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I want to talk about the fundraising. I mentioned it was a $110 million campaign, but the article said you raised almost $120 million. So you went quite a bit above it. Why do you think you were able to go above? Especially, I feel like it's a little bit of a financially, uncertain time right now.
If I were to tell you in 2018 that we were going to launch a campaign and 2 years later we're going to have a pandemic, it's like, wow, that's a crazy idea. But we did it. We extended ourselves a little bit because we really lost a year and a half with the pandemic. But I got to say, one of the big take-home messages from doing a campaign here is that First of all, people are really supportive. Here in Seattle, it's an amazing community. And when you talk about a legacy asset like the Woodland Park Zoo, we have 4 generations of people, maybe 6 generations of people that have been coming here. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because one of the questions that I ask everybody, do you have a zoo story? And mm-hmm. yours is Zoo Tunes, mm-hmm. But people have all kinds of stories. And it's amazing to me that everybody has some sort of a connection, either to this zoo because they lived in Seattle or to another zoo because they lived elsewhere. The big discovery is that we got over 100,000 donors to this campaign. Mm. So it was big gifts and small gifts and medium gifts, mm-hmm. of course, as every campaign. But the big discovery is how wide our base and how generous our donors are to recognize the role of this community asset we call about the green oasis in the middle of the city. And it's becoming very valuable.
When we think about how that money breaks down, not only from this fundraising campaign, but you've got ticket sales, you've got private events, corporate sponsors, private donors. Is there one overall that kind of takes a bigger chunk of that pie? Yeah.
So, we operate the zoo on behalf of the city of Seattle. This is a city-owned asset. They own the land and the building. So they give us some operational funding and maintenance funding, but we're also an enterprise. So about 63% of our revenue is business enterprise. Tickets, parking, ice cream cones,
really,
hot dogs,
okay,
events, music, weddings, et cetera, that we do all over. And we operate as a sharp revenue business. Mm-hmm. We are an attraction. About 20% of our revenue is philanthropy, so fundraising, grants, donations, et cetera. And about 12% is public support, mostly from taxpayers of City of Seattle and the taxpayers of King County that provide us with financial support. And the rest is endowment and investments and things like that.
That's interesting. I don't know if I would have guessed that.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of fun fact? Like, what's the most expensive exhibit? Or like, what's the, like, is it like taking the rhino poo out or something? What is the most expensive thing?
So, well, I can go on tidbits. I mean, there's all kinds of trivia that you can do about the zoo. But of course, the biggest exhibit and the most expensive is this one that we're going to be opening at $40 million. Building things in Seattle is expensive. Mm-hmm. We compost 83% of our waste stream. So we sell a product called Zoo-Doo. That is one of the most sought after fertilizers and composting.
Really? Okay.
So people line up at 4 a.m. to buy when we do our sales of Zoo-Doo because it's much appreciated.
That's awesome.
So we compost pretty much all the waste from the zoo, including food waste and things like that. So
well, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay, that's super great information about the finances of a zoo, but I do want to talk a little bit about the ethics of a zoo. I have to ask it. I think it's a hot topic. I was just at the bar last night talking to the bartenders, and we were kind of going back and forth about this. And it can be controversial. So it's really about animal welfare. I think there's a lot of people saying, is this the right thing to do? Blah, blah, blah. There was that huge documentary about the orcas in SeaWorld.
Yes.
What's your personal thought on the role of zoos and conservation?
Yeah, so, it's a valid question, and I don't shy away from this discussion. We have to understand that there's no free wild world out there. Really, this image that we have that we are impinging upon a natural world, and then if we can let animals run free, they would live their lives.
Everything will be fine.
Without everything would be fine. It's a kind of artificial mirage of anybody that has not really spent much time in nature. The idea is that everything in the world, all animals and all plants, are under human care. We need to take care of everything in the planet. Even the polar bears in the North Pole, or the penguins in Antarctica, or the jaguars in Brazil, in the Amazon, are affected by what we do. I mean, here I just got a text from a friend that went to Howe Island in the South Pacific, in south of Australia, one of the most remote islands in the world. And the birds make noise with all the plastic that's sounding in their gut.
Oh, my gosh.
Because they're like flying maracas, you know. And here we have the idea that if you let albatross free, they would be happy. And if you don't do anything to the polar bears, they would be happy. in the North Pole is an artificial perspective because we need to take care of them. What we do, the products that we buy, the things that we put in the supermarket, the way our package comes from Amazon, the way we wash ourselves with soap and shampoo, it really has a huge influence of what's happening in the planet. So this idea that there's a barrier between what we can take care here and what happens to nature is an artificial division. The zoo exists right now and is changing. That platform is changing from being a disseminator of news and information about animals, which was the old kind of Victorian concept of we're going to show you the world. Right now, all that is in your phone. I mean, really, you can Google it and you can look whatever trivia information you want about animals. But the reality is that the role of the zoo is evolving. And if we don't understand that, then we don't know what we're here for.
Yeah.
And the role of the zoo is really to make sure that everybody understands that they're caring for nature, they're caring for animals. Not only we do care here for the animals in the zoo, but we use these animals, and I'm not ashamed to say that we use these animals to make emotional and rational connections to our visitors to explain how that linkage exists between what you do every day and what's happening out to animals in the wild. So think about the zoo as an embassy for nature and the way we present that to the people. And here we have 1.3 million people coming through the gates every year.
Wow.
It's a giant megaphone. Any other environmental organization, any activist group, any advocate group would kill to have the membership and the drive that we have, the attendance that we have. Why not use it? We have 36,000 family members. These are people that come more than 3 times a year here to the zoo. And they love our mission and they love our cause and they support us financially. 100,000 supporters for our campaign. So we need to activate that movement. And we see ourselves as a social change agent. And that's the reason for zoos to exist. I admit there are terrible zoos out there.
Yeah.
There are terrible aquariums sometimes out there. Not everybody is doing and understands this mission, but my feeling is that those zoos and aquariums that don't understand the reason to exist and support conservation, climate change, and people's behavior change, in a sense, are going to disappear. They're going to be delegated to the dustbin of history.
We as a society have less tolerance for that.
Yes.
I think that we've gotten educated enough to where we're not going to just go see an animal in a cage and be okay with it anymore.
Yes.
Yeah,
well, I have to say that, most people need to know this, but our animals in the zoo probably get better health care than most Americans.
Can I stay in the zoo?
I can tell you, every animal gets an annual checkup. Their diets are designed by nutritionists with PhDs. They have we have a group of staff that are only dedicated to psychological enrichment, dietary enrichment. We have a geriatric unit that does rehabilitation for geriatric animals, give them massage and laser therapy and acupuncture. This is the kind of care that we provide to our animals. And I can tell you, without a mistake, it's probably better than most Americans.
Yeah, check me into this place. Okay, one more question before we move on. Do you have, and it's okay if you don't have an example, but you were the chair of the Ethics and Animal Welfare Committee. Or you are? You were?
Yeah, I am.
You still are. Okay. Is there a specific example you can give us as to something that maybe got brought up in front of the committee that you were deciding whether it was how to transfer an animal, or kind of help us understand what conversations are had on that committee?
So yeah, this is a committee of the Global Council of the World Zoo and Aquarium Association. So this is a global council. Okay. There are regional associations in each continent. There's one for North America, there's one for Latin America, there's one for Australia, one for the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow, okay.
So the World Association is like the umbrella association of all that. I'm in charge of the Ethics and Welfare Committee that takes, and during my tenure at that committee, we've been able to advance a global standard for animal welfare. So all the zoos in all these associations, whether it's Australia, Middle East, Europe, South America, all these zoos are committed to a standard that sets the minimum bar of what it is to take care of animal welfare in zoos and aquariums. And we finally did it. It's incredible because you have to translate the thing in 27 different languages. And, we have to deal with the Russian and Ukraine war and all kinds of crazy things. But it is really raising the standards for modern zoos and really making a distinction between the roadside attraction and the modern zoo that is committed to conservation and biodiversity.
What's one of the requirements?
So, for example, that they have to have a monitoring service, that every zoo needs to have an annual checkup on all the welfare status of all their animals in their collection. And that they need to submit a report to the regional association, and that the regional association, when they do their accreditation round, for example, we are accredited by the North American Association, that there is a welfare component, a very robust welfare component in the accreditation, and otherwise you lose your accreditation. So that standard was not even for all the regions of the world. And what we did with a global standard was to create an annual,
That's incredible.
For all modern zoos to comply to.
Wow, that's great. You're doing good work here. There's more new stuff happening at the zoo, like the Zoo Tunes has released their list of acts that I'm going to check out. And it's also, there's some Seattle Times articles about a baby penguin and a sloth bear club. We don't have time to get into all of that, but I encourage everyone listening to go check out all the new things happening at the zoo. Yeah. All right, our next article is about international tourism. So this was kind of an article written about the Visit Seattle presentation by the president and CEO, Tammy. She's kind of saying, we were doing great. We've got this new waterfront park. We've got record cruise ships. And of course, we've got FIFA. But at the same time, we've got the Trump administration having some interesting rhetoric around international trade and visits and all that kind of stuff. It's being shown from, one of the stats was cars coming from Canada down south. If they're licensed to Canada, that amount fell 43% year over year in March. So the same time last year versus this year in March. It didn't give me an exact number, but they said there were fewer people in the stands for the Toronto Mariners game. So again, a Canada Mariners game. It also looked at not just Canada, but the March data for Europe. That dropped about 17% from what we're used to seeing from Europe. And yeah, so overall, international tourism is down at the moment. The bright spot of this article was that they're trying to encourage U.S. travel, a lot more regional travel. So I wanted to hear from you. You'd mentioned, I think, 1.3 million visitors. Do you have any data on how much is local versus?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. What do you have?
So we do annual surveys and market surveys and all that. Yes. So we're mostly a regional attraction. So about 80% of our attraction comes from within the Washington, British Columbia, Idaho, Northern Oregon circle.
Yeah.
20% of our visitation is tourists. What I would consider tourists is outside that zone of influence. So international tourists and national tourists from other places. So that's about 20%. Of that international component, I would say about a third of that is Canadian tourism.
Oh.
Yes. So it's noticeable to us. It's hard to tell for us exactly where we are because, of course, January and February are super low months. So it's hard to extrapolate from the first quarter how the rest of the summer is going to look like.
Right.
But we're very worried. We're part of Visit Seattle. We're part of the FIFA group and all that. We're looking at those stats. And it's going to be a big punch for us if we don't get that.
Well, what are you prepared to do to kind of combat this? Are you going to try and market more to Canada? Or are you going to try and market more to local and try and boost some of that local numbers?
All of it.
Yeah.
And in a sense, we're part of the regional attractions to offer kind of a one-to-one Canadian dollar admission and prices and so on. We're not seeing any traction on that, to be sincere, unless it changes in the middle of the summer.
I thought that was a good idea.
We don't need what's happening. But the reality is that if that continues, we're about to lose about $600,000 in just the Canadian market alone, which is a significant loss for us.
Yeah, that really is. Anything else you want to say about the decrease of international tourism?
Well, it's amazing that when you look at 2017 and 18, our biggest international tourism was from China and Canada. And those are almost gone this year.
Is anything coming up instead of that? I saw in the article like a lot of more travel from India. No, nothing even close.
So no, our hope, and it's hard for me to tell because we are literally a summer destination. Yeah. So Nick, this is the weekend, when summer starts picking up. But really, we hope that national tourism picks up. it's funny because with economic recessions, zoos do relatively well because it's a staycation destination.
Oh, I see. Yeah. I would say bring hopes up.
You know, so instead of going to Mexico or going to Hawaii or to Thailand, maybe they'll come to the zoo.
Yeah.
But past results are not guarantee of future returns. So I have no idea what's going to happen. That's just many other CEOs. I think we're winging it.
Yeah. I like that. I agree. Okay. I also just noticed your coffee mug has a little tiger on it. So cute. Okay. Our third article here is going to be talking about Microsoft layoffs. This one, I have a friend who's applying for jobs and she was like, great. Now I have 2,000 more people competing with me. Microsoft's cutting about 2,000 jobs in Washington effective July 12th. This is part of a global layoff. And if you remember, they just laid off people in 2023. So I don't know. They just keep doing it. To give context, there's like a little over 50,000 Microsoft employees in Seattle, so they're cutting 2,000 of that, which to me feels pretty significant. The first articles that came out didn't comment on whether it had to do with AI, and then another article came out from PSPJ stating that almost half of these people are going to be software engineers, which I think we can all guess that has to do with AI writing code. And they say that it's an effort to reduce layers of management, which to me feels like a little bit of a spin. But yeah, that's kind of the major points of this article. Anything you want to say on that?
Well, again, the impact of AI is going to be very interesting. I have, proof that actually Microsoft is hiring at the same time that they're doing the cut. So evidently what they're doing is reshuffling the workforce like many companies. And I understand, in a sense, you have to stay lean. You have to stay on top of changes. They're at the kind of the leading edge of a kind of a revolution.
Yeah.
And they're changing, I think, their business model in a sense. So that's going to be very interesting. Everybody's kind of ear to the ground to see what happens there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's talk about workforce. When you're recruiting for talent, how is that unique for the zoo? And are you seeing, less people studying zoology and more people going to get their tech jobs? Has that kind of changed over the years? How do you approach recruiting?
So it's funny because I have a degree in zoology. I have a PhD in zoology. And every time I say that, that explains everything. Well, zoology has to do with zoos like, I don't know, dentistry had to do with toothpaste. And in a sense, it's very different. And in a sense, most people don't realize is that the zoo is really like a miniature city. So we have a plethora of professions here. You have people that study animals and zoologists and veterinarians, but you also have security and a transportation division and a IT division and a marketing and advertising and reporting and image making and movie making and all these things. So it's like a miniature city, really. So if you think that you need to work in the zoo, you have to work with animals, that's not true. I mean, we have nearly all the professions. So, but the reality is that it's a highly specialized workforce. For many of our professions, let me give you an example. For zoo veterinarian, to work as a zoo veterinarian, which is a super highly specialized profession, there's probably about perhaps 600 people that are certified to work in zoo veterinary. And there's 200 zoos.
600 people like nationwide?
Around nationwide.
Wow. And there's 200
So
zoos,
it's a giant bottleneck because, of course, some people are retiring, some people are coming into the work and to get the certification. So what zoos are doing is that they're actually paying for the residency. So veterinarians can actually come to the zoo to finish their careers there. Similar with keepers. I mean, it used to be that a keeper was somebody that would feed the animal and scoop poop. And the reality is that most of these people have master's degree in animal behavior and husbandry, and they have very specialized degrees, and the kind of work that they do with population management and programming for stud books and genetic tracing and behavioral enrichment is so complicated that these are very hard to find. So I'm very proud of having a super technical workforce. And the fact that Seattle continues to be attractive and Woodland Park Zoo continues to be attractive. Every time we post a position, we get worldwide applicants.
Okay, good. And how many people do you know?
About 370 full-time. And then during the summer, we hire about 200 people more for a lot of the seasonal positions. Yes.
Yeah, that's a lot to manage. You have so many interesting facts in your answers. I love this. With this article is a little bit about AI, and you kind of mentioned that. But is there an example of how the zoo's jumping on board with AI?
So one of the most interesting developments that we've been doing is on the field side. So we have a whole field conservation division that does tracking and reporting and research on animals in the wild. And one of the things that we've created is a remote monitoring program for carnivores here in the Pacific Northwest. So it's one of the largest networks of camera traps where we actually track wolverines and wolves and Canadian lynx and pine martens and things that are incredibly hard to see with remote sensing camera traps. We have paired these camera traps with a scent dispenser, a really stinky smell that comes in front of the camera and attracts these animals to come in. And the way we manage to do it is that the animals then look into the camera and we can take a picture of the animal, and the white markings on the chest of pine martens and wolverines are individual to the animal. So we can understand how they're moving and how far they're going and so on. And we can do it in the middle of the winter where it's impossible to be. You can be, Mount Baker has 27 feet of snow. So it's impossible for a biologist to go and monitor pine martens during 6 months of the year in the Northern Cascades.
So this is all over, not just monitoring the zoo. You're monitoring everywhere for all these animals.
So we're doing everything from British Columbia to Northern Oregon.
Oh my goodness.
Looking at all the wolverines and all the pine martens in the Olympic Peninsula and so on. And it's a network of camera traps. One of the things that's happening is that we're getting such a flow of photographs. There used to be that you would get a few thousand pictures. Now we're getting hundreds of thousands of pictures. And now the question is how we're going to sort that out. So AI is really are coming to do image recognition and do several tiers of filtering of the images. We get millions of pictures of squirrels, but we need to know where the wolverines are and where the pine martens are. And now we're actually putting this year, we're going to start deploying a hair plucker that takes a hair and does a genetic sample of the animal. And that we're going to have, we're going to need to do all the genetic monitoring of those hairs. And evidently this is going to be done by robots or bots because otherwise humans would take us decades to do that. So this is the actual application of artificial intelligence to go through and have real-time understanding of what's happening with the ecosystem and the indicators of the ecosystem in real time. Yeah,
there's some things about AI I don't love, but one I do like is being able to analyze huge amounts of data. I think healthcare is definitely seeing that.
Yeah.
Okay, our last one's about Nordstrom. So we had talked about this in a couple of different episodes, but it finally went through the Mexican retailer El Puerto de Liverpool and combined with Nordstrom. So Nordstrom still owns 50.1%. So they're almost equal, but Nordstrom still is a little bit ahead there. And Eric and Pete Nordstrom, they will still lead the company. This transaction was worth $6.25 billion. I wanted to start first a little bit. You'd mentioned the city of Seattle owns the zoo. What's kind of been the history of who owns it and who operates it, and how did that come to be?
So about year 2000, so 25 years ago, the city decided to kind of look for a private partner to manage
because they were running it. The city of Seattle was running it, and they're like, "This is hard."
Yes. And it's hard. The business was getting more complicated. There's animal rights and all the other issues, animal welfare, et cetera, et cetera. So the nonprofit that was already operating here, the Woodland Park Zoo Society, bid for that and won that award. And we have a 20-year contract with the city. It's called an operational management agreement. We just renewed it in 2021 for another 20 years.
Okay.
So it's a contract that we have with the city. And this idea is that we operate the city, the zoo on behalf of the city.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. And part of this deal, I know when we talked about Nordstrom and a lot of companies that go private, is that they don't have to answer to these shareholders anymore. They don't have to increase profit every quarter. Yeah. It gives them a little bit more freedom. And you and I were kind of talking about there's never a world in which you don't have somebody to answer to. So for you, in my mind, I was thinking who you have to answer to is a little bit is donors. But after you're talking about the city of Seattle, maybe it's more them. So how do you manage? Let's say somebody gives you $1 million, couple $1 million, and you're like, I really want, this penguin exhibit. Well, you probably already have penguins. I want XYZ exhibit.
Yeah.
How do you manage, thank you for the money, but no, we're not going to have your weird exhibit?
So it's funny. As a nonprofit, of course, we don't have shareholders, but we have stakeholders.
Yeah.
So, of course, City of Seattle has a number of regulations. King County also gives us some funding support, and we commit to, keeping the zoo affordable, keeping the zoo available and accessible to everybody. If a big donor comes and gives us $1 million, which happens every now and then, yes, we have a naming protocols that we agreed with the City of Seattle.
Okay.
And their naming protocols, if you want to name a whole exhibit, it's a bigger check than if you want to name a portion of the area. But evidently, we have a protocol. It's all written and it's agreed by the city. So we.
But they couldn't tell you what animal exhibit to do, or could they have a say on that?
We present as a proposal to them once we engage with the donor.
Yeah,
and
yes,
and we have the ranges for each one of these exhibits. And when we design an exhibit from scratch, like we did with the Forest Trailhead, we already have all the naming protocols and kind of a pyramid of engagement for donors. If you get this much, you want to name it. And we give them the option. Some donors don't want to be named. Some of them want to be named. Some of them want to be named higher than they really merit. So I really need to.
Having dealt with sponsors with events, I do know what you're talking about.
But of course, we also have commercial sponsors, corporate sponsors. So for example, the Zoo Tunes concert is sponsored by a couple of companies and they've been with us for 20 years. So yes.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, I think, is there anything else on that you wanted to talk about for your last question?
No, that's good.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, last question I've been asking some guests is, how do you get motivated when you don't feel like doing anything? I want to guess that it's going to be your painting, but what is it?
So I'm really have one of my absolute terrors is getting bored.
Okay.
And so I don't stay still very much. Yeah, my painting has been my mental health. So I think I've done it almost, it is a profession. So in a sense, I have a secondary profession. I'm doing 3 gallery shows this year. I'm doing commissions. Okay. I have a gallery representation. So it's a little kind of secret part of my life, but it's important for me, and I think it's important for everybody to keep a life outside work. You have to do more than what work is. So, of course, we have a fantastic nature. I'm a bird watcher, and I just go all over the place, and it's fantastic. Yeah, so it is important that you have other interests in life. Yes, yes.
And then maybe when you do that, then you'll be motivated to go back and send that email you don't really feel like doing.
Yeah, and the fact that I think working at the zoo is it's interesting because you can plan your day, but pretty much at 7 a.m, the day can go
Things can
haywire.
Go off the rails.
Yeah, so Wednesday we had a gas leak. Somebody was digging a hole, and then all of a sudden, all that, and then we are bringing in a new pair of tapers, and I have to go to the quarantine room to look at how the tapers were doing. And then in the afternoon, we had to plan for flying some flamingo eggs from Atlanta and all the. So that's a day. It never gets boring. It
never does. When I worked this event in Boston, I think I can say this, but even though they hired extra security, somebody broke in and destroyed a bunch of things. And they knocked over all these water bubblers. And my boss got a call at 5:30 in the morning. I was like, we don't know if we can open this event by time for your attendees, which I don't know their budget. I would guess a couple million. And it all got solved and the attendees knew no different. But to your point, it's you wake up and you have no idea what's going to happen.
It never gets boring. And it's one of the things I like about this job. It's not a 9-to-5 job.
No, it is not. No, it is not. Well, Alejandro, I will let you get back to it. Thank you so much for hosting me. And again, thank you for the tickets. I'm so excited to check it out. If you guys haven't been to the Woodland Park Zoo in a while, please come down. It's really fun here. And come to Zoo Tunes.
Yes, and dinosaurs for the kids and virtual reality show and all kinds of attractions this summer. So make sure you come here. It's a different zoo.
All right. Well, thanks again.
Thank you, Rachel.
This has been The Weekly with production assistance from Nick Patry. If you liked what you heard, rate us and write a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. We love listener feedback, so if you have any story suggestions, comments, or complaints, email us at info@theweeklyseattle.com. Make sure to check back next Sunday for the latest local business news. We'll see you next time.